She spent one night with a stranger. She met online, unaware he was a wanted billionaire who turned himself in for her. It was supposed to be one quiet night, one coffee, one conversation, one moment of hope for a woman who'd learned to guard her heart. But the next morning, the news explodes. That stranger is a wanted billionaire, and he just turned himself in. Now her private life is dragged into the spotlight. The man she trusted names her as his only alibi. The world calls her a liar, a distraction, a setup. Then the truth gets even darker. He didn't meet her by accident. She was chosen because her own father is the investigator trying to put him away. So now she has to ask, was she used? Or did he sacrifice everything to protect her? And when love, truth, and blood collide, who will she betray to survive? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead as Naomi Carter folded the last metal chair, her movements precise and practiced. The empty sanctuary of Grace Community Church held the lingering warmth of fellowship, though most members had departed over an hour ago. She stacked the chair with its companions against the wall, brushing a stray lock of dark hair from her face. "Good night, Naomi," called Mrs. Henderson from the doorway, her silver hair catching the light. "Don't stay too late, dear." Naomi managed a gentle smile. "Just finishing up, Mrs. Henderson. Drive safely." She watched the elderly woman leave, noting how quickly the conversation ended, just like all the others. "No, would you like to join us for dinner?" "No, we're having a game night next weekend." Just polite acknowledgements and goodbye waves that had become as familiar as her Sunday routine. The drive home to her apartment was quiet, streetlights casting intermittent shadows across her dashboard. Her small Toyota hummed along the familiar route, while her mind wandered to the empty evening ahead. The autumn air had turned crisp, and leaves skittered across the parking lot as she pulled into her designated spot at the Maple Grove Apartments. Her one-bedroom apartment welcomed her with its modest comfort, a small blue couch with carefully arranged throw pillows, a bookshelf filled with well-loved devotionals, and family photos that told only half the story. The frame holding her high school graduation picture caught her eye. She stood between her Aunt Evelyn and her father Marcus, their smiles frozen in a moment of forced harmony. Naomi's fingers traced the edge of the frame, remembering how her father had arrived just minutes before the ceremony, still wearing his FBI badge, still carrying the weight of whatever case had kept him away. Again. She set the photo down with a gentle sigh. "Lord, give me patience," she whispered, a prayer that had become as natural as breathing. The microwave hummed as she heated up leftover chicken soup, another Sunday dinner for one. Settling onto her couch with the warm bowl, Naomi pulled out her phone, hesitating before opening the dating app she'd downloaded 3 weeks ago. Her Aunt Evelyn's words echoed in her mind. "Being careful with your heart doesn't mean keeping it locked away, sweetheart." The app's interface glowed softly. Faith and fellowship, where believers find connection. Naomi had resisted for months, but Evelyn's gentle persistence and genuine concern had finally won out. "You give so much to others, Naomi," she'd said over tea last month. "Maybe it's time to open yourself to receiving too." Several new messages waited in her inbox. Most were the usual, generic greetings or comments about her profile picture from the church picnic. But one message stood out, its thoughtfulness evident even in the preview. "Dear Naomi, your profile caught my attention not just because of your beautiful smile, but because of how you described your volunteer work with children's ministry. The way you wrote about helping kids understand God's love reminded me of my own journey of faith." She clicked to read more, something warming in her chest as the message continued. The sender, Daniel, had taken time to reference specific details from her profile, asking questions that showed genuine interest in her thoughts and experiences. No pushy compliments, no immediate pressure to meet. Just respectful curiosity and shared values. Naomi set her empty soup bowl aside, curling her legs underneath her as she read the message again. Her finger hovered over the reply button as memories of past disappointments surfaced, dating attempts that had fizzled, connections that had proved shallow, and always, always, the shadow of her father's emotional distance coloring her expectations of men. The soft ticking of her wall clock filled the silence as she closed her eyes, offering another quiet prayer. Lord, guide my steps. Help me be wise but not fearful. Opening her eyes, she began to type a response, choosing her words carefully. She acknowledged the thoughtfulness of his message, shared a bit more about her work with the children's ministry, and found herself agreeing to his suggestion of meeting for coffee the next evening. I know a quiet cafe downtown called The Common Ground, she wrote. They have comfortable seating and good conversation doesn't get lost in the noise. After sending the message, Naomi walked to a small balcony, wrapping her cardigan tighter against the evening chill. The city lights twinkled below, each one representing lives and stories she'd never know. Her own story had been one of service, of quiet faith, of learning to find joy in giving even when receiving seemed scarce. The weight of her father's absence pressed against her heart, not just his physical absence over the years, but the emotional distance that had grown between them like a slow-spreading frost. Marcus Carter's dedication to justice and truth had shaped his career as a federal investigator, but it had also shaped the walls between them. Their conversations now were limited to holiday phone calls and occasional text messages, each interaction careful and contained. Her phone buzzed with a reply from Daniel, confirming their coffee meeting for 6 o'clock the next evening. A small smile tugged at her lips. Not the desperate hope of someone seeking rescue from loneliness, but the quiet optimism of someone who had learned to trust God's timing. Back inside, Naomi prepared for bed with her usual routine, moisturizer, pajamas, and a few minutes with her devotional. As she turned out the light, she thought about what Aunt Evelyn always said. God doesn't waste our waiting seasons, dear heart. He uses them to prepare us for His best. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. For now, Naomi let herself feel the gentle stirring of possibility, like the first warm breeze of spring after a long winter. Not desperate, not demanding, but open to what God might have in store. The autumn evening wrapped around Naomi as she walked toward the Common Ground Cafe. Her sensible heels clicked against the sidewalk, matching the steady rhythm of her heart. She had chosen her outfit carefully, a navy blue dress that spoke of professionalism while still feeling feminine, paired with a cream cardigan that provided warmth against the October chill. The cafe's windows glowed invitingly, strings of soft white lights framing the view inside. Naomi checked her watch. 5 minutes to 6 o'clock. Being early gave her a moment to breathe, to settle her thoughts with a quick prayer before stepping inside. The familiar scent of coffee and freshly baked pastries enveloped her as she entered. Several couples and individuals occupied the mix of plush armchairs and wooden tables, their quiet conversations creating a gentle backdrop. Naomi chose a corner table that offered both privacy and a clear view of the entrance. At exactly 6 o'clock, a man walked in who matched Daniel's profile picture. He carried himself with quiet confidence, wearing charcoal slacks and a blue button-down shirt that suggested both care and comfort. His eyes found hers immediately, and a genuine smile crossed his face as he approached. "Naomi?" he asked, his voice warm and steady. "I'm Daniel." She stood to greet him, noticing he was taller than she had expected, maybe 6 feet or so. "It's nice to meet you in person," she replied, appreciating that he maintained a respectful distance as they shook hands. They settled into their seats, and a young barista approached with menus. I recommend their chai tea latte, Naomi offered, breaking the initial moment of silence. It's perfectly spiced. I trust your judgment. Daniel smiled, and when the barista returned, he ordered the chai along with Naomi. The simple act of sharing a recommendation seemed to ease them both into conversation. You mentioned in your message that you're a consultant? Naomi asked, wrapping her hands around her warm mug when their drinks arrived. Daniel nodded, taking a sip of his chai. Yes, though I'm between projects at the moment, it gives me time to really consider my next steps. His explanation was straightforward, lacking the usual need to impress that Naomi had encountered in previous dates. But I'd love to hear more about your work with the children's ministry. How did you get started with that? As Naomi shared stories about teaching Sunday school and organizing youth events, she noticed how attentively Daniel listened. He asked thoughtful questions about her methods for explaining complex biblical concepts to young minds, and shared his own experiences volunteering at his previous church's summer camps. The hours slipped by easily, their conversation flowing from faith to family, from favorite books to future hopes. When they finally noticed the time, 8:30 in the evening, Daniel suggested a walk to enjoy the crisp autumn air. There's a nice path around the park across the street, Naomi suggested, gathering her purse. It's well lit and usually has other people around at this hour. They strolled side by side, maintaining a modest distance that felt both comfortable and appropriate. The park's lampposts cast warm pools of light along the path, and the rustle of leaves in the breeze filled their comfortable silences. How long have you lived in the city? Daniel asked, as they rounded a corner near a small fountain. 5 years now, Naomi replied, adjusting her cardigan against a cool gust of wind. I moved here after college for work, but it really feels like home now. Though sometimes... She paused, considering her words carefully. Sometimes I miss having family closer by. Daniel's pace slowed thoughtfully. You mentioned your aunt earlier, Evelyn, but your parents live further away? Naomi nodded, grateful for his gentle approach to what could be a sensitive topic. My mother passed away when I was young. My father, well, he's alive but distant, physically and emotionally. She surprised herself with her honesty, but something about Daniel's quiet attention made it feel safe to share. They completed their circuit of the park, ending up back near Naomi's apartment building. The night had grown cooler, and their conversation had reached that natural lull that usually signals an evening's end. But neither seemed quite ready to say goodbye. Would you like to come up for some tea? Naomi found herself asking. I have a nice collection of herbal blends. The invitation surprised her even as she spoke it, but it felt right. Not rushed or pressured, just a natural extension of their evening. Daniel's response was careful, considerate. I'd like that if you're comfortable. Though I should probably head home by 11, I have an early meeting tomorrow. In her apartment, Naomi moved around her small kitchen with practiced ease, preparing 2 mugs of chamomile tea. Daniel stood by her living room window, admiring the city view, but maintaining a respectful distance from her personal space. They settled onto opposite ends of her couch, mugs in hand. The conversation continued, diving deeper into their faith journeys, their struggles and victories. When Daniel mentioned his own father's battle with illness, Naomi heard the echo of pain in his voice and recognized a kindred spirit in dealing with family complexities. As 11 o'clock approached, Daniel set down his empty mug. Would it be all right if we prayed together before I leave? He asked, his voice holding a hint of uncertainty that made the request even more endearing. I'd like that, Naomi replied softly. They joined hands somewhat awkwardly at first, but as they began to pray, the awkwardness melted away. Daniel's prayer was simple and honest, thanking God for their evening and asking for guidance in whatever might come next. Naomi added her own quiet, "Amen," feeling a sense of peace settle over her heart. At the door, their goodbye was warm but unhurried. No presumptuous kiss, no pressure for immediate plans, just a genuine smile and a simple, "Thank you for a lovely evening." After Daniel left, Naomi went through her nighttime routine, her heart full but calm. The evening had unfolded with a natural grace that felt like a gift, not the whirlwind of romance novels, but something more precious, the potential beginning of something real, rooted in shared faith and mutual respect. She fell asleep that night with a prayer of gratitude on her lips, knowing that whatever happened next, she had experienced something rare, an evening where two souls had connected with genuine care and chosen to let that connection grow at its own pace, guided by wisdom and faith rather than impulse. Morning sunlight filtered through Naomi's bedroom curtains, painting soft patterns on the walls. She woke gradually, her consciousness slowly registering the unfamiliar sound of steady breathing beside her. For a moment, she lay perfectly still, letting the memories of the previous evening settle in her mind. Julian slept peacefully on top of the covers, still fully dressed in his clothes from the night before. They had talked until exhaustion overtook them, their conversation drifting naturally into comfortable silence, and then sleep. Now, in the gentle morning light, Naomi studied his face. The sharp lines of his jaw had softened in sleep, and there was something vulnerable about the way his hand rested near his chest. She noticed little details she had missed in the dim evening light, a small scar near his temple, the slight silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. His face held a peacefulness that made her own heart feel quiet and steady. For the first time in years, she felt truly safe in someone's presence. Moving carefully to avoid disturbing him, Naomi slipped out of bed and padded to the kitchen. She began preparing breakfast, the familiar routine of measuring coffee grounds and whisking eggs, giving her time to process her thoughts. The sound of running water from the bathroom told her Julian had awakened. "Good morning," he said softly, appearing in the kitchen doorway. His shirt was slightly wrinkled from sleep, but his eyes were alert and warm. "I hope you don't mind that I used your bathroom to freshen up." "Not at all," Naomi replied, sliding a plate of scrambled eggs and toast across the small kitchen table. "Coffee? Please?" He settled into a chair, running a hand through his slightly damp hair. "Thank you for breakfast, and for last night, for listening, for sharing your stories." They ate in comfortable silence for a few moments before Julian spoke again, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "You know, spending time with you, it makes me think about choices I've made, regrets I carry." Naomi noticed how he pushed his eggs around the plate, his fork tracing abstract patterns as he gathered his thoughts. "I believe strongly in taking responsibility for our actions," he continued, "in making things right when we can. Sometimes the hardest part is knowing where to start, how to fix what's broken without causing more damage." When Naomi asked about his work as a consultant, he redirected the conversation gently but definitively. She noticed how he spoke in generalities about his professional life, though his words about personal growth and responsibility rang with genuine emotion. Around 9:30 in the morning, Julian glanced at his watch. "I have a meeting I need to prepare for," he said, standing from the table. "Thank you again, Naomi, for everything." Before leaving, he pulled out a small notepad from his jacket pocket and wrote something by hand. He folded the paper carefully and placed it on the counter. "Read it after I'm gone?" he asked, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her heart skip. Naomi nodded, walking him to the door. Their goodbye was simple, a gentle touch on her arm, a quiet, "Take care of yourself." But it held more meaning than any passionate embrace could have conveyed. After he left, Naomi unfolded the note. The handwriting was neat and measured. Naomi, thank you for sharing your evening, your stories, and your faith with me. Your kindness and authenticity are rare gifts. I respect you too much to make promises I'm not certain I can keep, but please know that our time together meant more than I can express. Julian. At work, Naomi found herself drifting through her tasks in a pleasant haze. She caught herself smiling at random moments, while filing reports during her lunch break, even in the middle of a rather tedious staff meeting. Her co-workers noticed her unusual distraction, but seemed pleased to see her happy. Evening found her at home, curled up in her favorite reading chair with her journal open on her lap. She wrote carefully, trying to capture the essence of what made the previous night so special. It wasn't just physical attraction or romantic excitement. It was the rare experience of being truly seen and heard by another person. Dear God, she wrote in her prayer journal, thank you for last night. Whatever happens next, I'm grateful for that connection, that reminder that meaningful relationships are possible. Help me trust your timing and your plan. She felt at peace with the possibility that the night might have been a complete story in itself. Beautiful, but finite. Some experiences were meant to be singular moments of grace rather than beginnings. Her phone had been buzzing periodically throughout the evening with news alerts, but she had ignored them, preferring to stay in her quiet space of reflection. As she prepared for bed, another notification lit up her screen. This time, something made her pause and look. The headline stared back at her, black letters suddenly stark against the white background. Naomi felt her breath catch in her throat, the world seeming to stop on its axis as she read the words that would change everything. Naomi's fingers trembled as she reached for the TV remote. The headline that had frozen her in place still blazed on her phone screen. Tech billionaire Julian Hale surrenders to federal authorities. The television flickered to life, filling her quiet apartment with harsh, fluorescent lighting from a hastily assembled press conference. Reporters jostled each other in the background, their shouted questions creating a wall of noise. But it was the figure at the center of the frame that drew her complete attention. Julian stood there, the same man who had shared her breakfast table mere hours ago. His suit was different, crisp and formal, but his composed expression was achingly familiar. Metal glinted at his wrists. Handcuffs. The sight made her stomach lurch. This is a developing story. The news anchor's voice cut through her shock. Julian Hale, heir to the Hale technology empire, surrendered himself to federal authorities this afternoon. Sources indicate the sealed warrant relates to allegations of widespread corporate corruption. Naomi sank onto her couch, her legs no longer able to support her. The room seemed to spin as pieces clicked into horrible place. His careful avoidance of personal details, his talk of regrets and making things right, the way he'd steered conversations away from his work. The camera zoomed in on Julian's face as he stepped up to the podium. Despite the handcuffs, he maintained the same quiet dignity she'd witnessed in her kitchen that morning. His voice, when he spoke, was steady and clear. I come forward today of my own volition, he began, to address serious allegations regarding corporate practices at Hale Technology. My decision to surrender was made after careful consideration and consultation with my attorney. Reporters shouted questions about timing and motives. Julian waited for them to quiet before continuing. I can confirm that I spent last night in the company of a woman who can verify my whereabouts. I mention this only because questions have been raised about my activities in the hours before surrendering. I ask that the media respect her privacy. She has no connection to these events beyond offering kindness to someone who needed it. Naomi's phone began buzzing with incoming calls, friends and family who must have recognized Julian from their dating site connection. She let them go to voicemail, unable to tear her eyes from the screen. The press conference continued, but the words blurred together as panic began to set in. She thought about their evening together, the coffee shop where they'd met, the walk they'd taken, the servers who had seen them, her neighbors who might have noticed him coming or going. How long before someone made the connection? Her hands shook as she pulled up their dating site conversation. Their messages were still there, digital breadcrumbs leading straight to her door. She quickly deleted her account, but knew it was probably too late. Nothing truly disappeared from the internet. The sound of car doors slamming outside her window made her jump. Peering through the curtains, she saw 3 news vans parked along her street. Reporters with cameras were already approaching different buildings, notebooks in hand. "We're getting reports." A news anchor's voice drew her attention back to the TV. That Julian Hale may have met his companion through an online dating service. Sources are currently working to verify. A knock on her neighbor's door echoed through the thin walls. She could hear muffled voices, questions being asked. "I'm looking for information about a woman who might have hosted Julian Hale last night." Another knock, closer this time. Naomi's heart pounded so hard she could barely breathe. She moved through her apartment on unsteady legs, double-checking that her door was locked, drawing all the curtains closed. Her phone buzzed again, a number she didn't recognize. As soon as it went to voicemail, another call came through. Then another. Text messages began flooding in from unknown numbers. How had they found her so quickly? The knocking reached her door. "Ms. Carter, this is Michael Chen from Channel 7 News. We'd like to ask you a few questions about Julian Hale." Naomi pressed her back against the wall beside her window, trying to make herself as small as possible. Through a tiny gap in the curtains, she could see more news vans arriving. Reporters were interviewing her neighbors on the sidewalk, camera lights creating harsh pools of illumination in the growing dusk. Her peaceful life, her quiet, orderly world of work and church and service, was shattering around her. All because of one evening, one connection that had felt so genuine and safe. She thought about Julian's note, still sitting on her counter. "Your kindness and authenticity are rare, gifts." Had he known, even then, what was coming? More knocks, more voices. Her phone continued its relentless buzzing. Through the walls, she could hear the excited voices of neighbors, probably telling reporters yes, they had seen him, describing what he looked like, confirming her identity. "Miss Carter, please, just a few questions. Can you confirm your relationship with Julian Hale? Did you know about the federal investigation?" The voices overlapped, growing more insistent. Naomi slid down the wall until she sat on the floor, hugging her knees to her chest. She could see camera flashes through the curtains now, could hear the growing crowd in the hallway. Her phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "I'm Julian's attorney. Please don't speak to anyone. We'll be in touch soon with guidance." Naomi stared at the message as tears finally spilled down her cheeks. There would be no going back from this moment, no returning to her life of quiet anonymity. The world had found her, and it was demanding answers she wasn't sure she had. The knocking continued, persistent and hungry. Through her tears, Naomi watched the shadows of feet moving under her door, listened to the murmur of voices plotting their next move, and felt the weight of unwanted attention pressing in from all sides. Her sanctuary had become a fishbowl, and she was trapped inside with nowhere to hide. Dawn crept through Naomi's curtains, painting pale stripes across her untouched bed. She hadn't slept, couldn't sleep, with reporters camping outside her building all night. Their voices had finally quieted around 3 a.m, but she knew they were still there, waiting. Her phone lay silent now, its battery drained from the constant calls and messages. She'd plugged it in but kept it off, unable to face more questions she couldn't answer. The only sound in her apartment was the low hum of her television, volume turned down to a whisper. Naomi wrapped her blanket tighter around her shoulders as she sat curled in her armchair, watching the morning news through puffy, tired eyes. They were still talking about Julian, showing the same clips of his surrender over and over. Each time she saw his face, her heart twisted with confusion and hurt. The image changed to a new press conference. Naomi reached for her coffee mug, then froze. The remote clattered to the floor. "I'm Special Agent Marcus Carter." Her father's familiar, stern face filled the screen. "I've been leading this investigation into the Hale family's financial dealings for the past 5 years. The mug shook in Naomi's hands. She set it down before she could drop it, pressing her fingers against her lips. Her father looked older than she remembered. More grey in his hair, deeper lines around his mouth. But his voice held the same unwavering authority she remembered from childhood. "We have substantial evidence of widespread corruption within the Hale Corporation," Marcus continued. Julian Hale's cooperation is a significant development, but this investigation is far from over. Justice requires complete accountability. The news anchor's voice cut in. "Agent Carter, there are reports that Mr. Hale spent his last night of freedom with a young woman. Will she be questioned as part of the investigation?" Naomi watched her father's jaw tighten, a tiny tell she recognized from years of watching him control his reactions. "All relevant witnesses will be interviewed according to proper procedure. No one is above the law, and no one is exempt from their responsibility to truth and justice." She fumbled for her phone, hands trembling as she powered it on. Messages flooded in, but she ignored them, scrolling for her father's number. She hadn't called it in 3 years, not since their last argument about her wasting her potential at a non-profit instead of following him into law enforcement. The phone rang 4 times. She almost hung up, but then, "Naomi." His voice was carefully neutral, professional, as if they spoke every day. "Did you know?" The words came out raw, ragged. "When Julian met me, did you know?" A pause. She could hear papers rustling, a door closing. "This line isn't secure. We should—" "Don't." Naomi's fingers gripped the phone harder. "Just tell me, did you know he was meeting me?" Another pause, longer this time. "We had surveillance on all his online activities. Yes, I knew when he contacted you through the dating site." The room seemed to tilt sideways. Naomi pressed her free hand against the wall to steady herself. "And you didn't warn me? Didn't think maybe your daughter deserved to know she was being used as part of your investigation? The integrity of the case, the integrity?" Naomi's laugh held no humor. "That's rich, coming from you. What about my integrity? My privacy? Do you have any idea what's happening outside my apartment right now? I've assigned protective detail to monitor the situation." His tone shifted, became almost gentle. "Naomi, you need to understand. Julian Hale isn't who you think he is. His family's corruption runs deep. People have been hurt, lives destroyed. Whatever he told you that night—" "He told me he had regrets," Naomi cut in, "that he wanted to make things right. He was honest and kind and—" Her voice cracked. "And I don't know if any of it was real. The timing of his surrender wasn't coincidental." Marcus said, "He knew we were closing in. Meeting you, spending time with you. It was likely part of his strategy, creating witnesses for his whereabouts, building sympathy." Each word hit like a physical blow. Naomi remembered Julian's intent focus when she spoke. His careful questions, the way he'd listened. Had it all been calculated? Performance? "I need to go," she whispered. "Naomi, wait. Let me send someone to bring you in. We need your statement, and it's not safe." She ended the call, letting the phone slip from her fingers onto the carpet. Outside, she could hear the reporters stirring to life again, their voices rising with the sun. On her television, they were showing Julian's surrender again, his calm face, his steady words about spending the night with someone who could verify his location. Had he been protecting her by not naming her directly? Or setting her up to be discovered, knowing the media would eventually track her down? The night that had felt so genuine, so unexpectedly meaningful. Was it all part of some larger plan? Naomi hugged her knees to her chest, rocking slightly as tears blurred her vision. The warmth she'd felt with Julian, the safety, the connection. It haunted her now. She didn't know what to trust. Her heart, which still wanted to believe in his sincerity, or her mind, which whispered that she'd been naive, manipulated, used as a pawn in a game between her father and a man she'd never really known at all. On her coffee table, Julian's handwritten note caught the morning light. Your kindness and authenticity are rare gifts. She stared at the words until they swam before her eyes, wondering if they were truth or strategy, protection or manipulation. In the growing light of dawn, she had no answers, only questions that echoed in the lonely silence of her apartment, drowned out by the persistent voices of reporters waiting below. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Naomi walked toward the entrance of Hope Haven Community Center, where she coordinated youth programs. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing since dawn. Texts, calls, social media notifications. She'd turned off most alerts, but they kept coming. Someone must have connected the dots, must have dug through her social media, found her workplace. Because there they were, a small crowd of reporters clustered near the front doors, cameras and microphones at the ready. Ms. Carter, is it true you spent the night with Julian Hale? What's your relationship with the Hale family? Did you know about the investigation? Were you involved in the corruption scheme? The questions hit her like physical blows. Naomi ducked her head, clutching her purse closer as she tried to push through. A security guard from the building rushed out to help clear a path. Inside, the normally peaceful lobby buzzed with whispers. Her co-workers, people she'd worked alongside for 3 years, stared openly or avoided eye contact entirely. Sharon from accounting quickly minimized a web page as Naomi passed her desk. But not before Naomi caught a glimpse of the headline. Mystery woman in Hale case. Revealed police chief's estranged daughter. Naomi. Her supervisor, David, stood in his office doorway. His expression was pained. Can we talk? She followed him inside, sinking into the familiar chair across from his desk. The same chair where they'd planned summer programs, discussed budgets, celebrated successes. Now it felt like sitting in judgment. I'm sure you understand this puts us in a difficult position. David began carefully. Our donors, the board, they're concerned about the publicity. Naomi's throat tightened. I haven't done anything wrong. No one's saying you have. He shuffled some papers, not meeting her eyes. But given the sensitive nature of our work with at-risk youth, we need to avoid any appearance of impropriety. The board feels it's best if you take some administrative leave. Paid, of course, just until this situation resolves. The words administrative leave echoed in her head as she gathered her things. 3 years of dedication, of staying late to help teens with homework, of organizing food drives and mentorship programs, all suddenly overshadowed by one night, one choice. Her phone pinged again. Against her better judgment, she looked. Someone had shared her profile picture with the caption, "Gold digger or daddy issues? Either way, someone's getting played." The comments below were worse. Assumptions about her character, her morals, her race. "Stay strong, honey," the security guard whispered as he escorted her out through a side door. But there were reporters there too, shouting questions about her father, about Julian, about things she couldn't even process. She barely remembered the drive home. The world felt distant, unreal, like she was watching someone else's life implode on television. When she reached her apartment building, a familiar figure stood waiting. Her Aunt Evelyn, laden with grocery bags, her face creased with concern. "I saw the news," Evelyn said simply, pulling Naomi into a fierce hug. "Let's get you inside." In Naomi's kitchen, Evelyn moved with quiet efficiency, unpacking comfort foods, fresh bread, soup ingredients, Naomi's favorite tea. The familiar sounds of cooking filled the apartment as Evelyn chopped vegetables for homemade chicken soup. "They put me on leave," Naomi said finally, her voice small. "Everyone was looking at me like you were human?" Evelyn's tone was gentle but firm. "Like you'd met someone who seemed kind and genuine and chose to trust. There's no shame in that, baby girl. The things they're saying online." Naomi's voice cracked. "About me being naive, being used, about Dad, about my race." Evelyn set down her knife and came to sit beside Naomi. "People who don't know your heart will always find ways to judge, but God knows your truth, and He's bigger than any headline." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the soup simmering on the stove, filling the apartment with warmth. Evelyn's presence was like a shield, creating a space where Naomi could just breathe. "Your mama would be so proud of you," Evelyn said softly. "Standing in your truth, even when it's hard. She always said you had a lion's heart in a lamb's body." Naomi smiled through tears, remembering her mother's words. The cancer had taken her when Naomi was 16, but her wisdom lingered. "Let's pray," Evelyn suggested, taking Naomi's hands in hers. Her voice rose soft but strong. "Lord, we come to you in this storm, knowing you are our anchor. Guard our sister's heart from bitterness. Let her feel your presence in every moment of doubt, and help her remember that no shame or judgment can separate her from your love." The prayer continued, wrapping around Naomi like a warm blanket. Outside, she could still hear occasional shouts from persistent reporters. Her phone still buzzed with unwanted notifications. But here, in this moment, she felt something settle in her spirit, a quiet strength, a reminder that she wasn't alone. The doorbell rang just as they finished their soup. A courier handed her an official-looking envelope. Inside was a formal request for her cooperation with the federal investigation, complete with meeting dates and legal warnings about the consequences of non-compliance. "What are you thinking?" Evelyn asked, watching Naomi's face as she read. "I'm thinking," Naomi took a deep breath, "that maybe it's time to stop hiding, to face whatever truth is waiting, about Julian, about Dad, about all of it." Evelyn squeezed her hand. "Then we'll face it together, one step at a time." The afternoon light was fading now, casting long shadows across her living room. But for the first time since the nightmare began, Naomi felt something besides fear, a quiet resolve, born of prayer and presence, and her aunt's unwavering support. The investigation summons lay on her coffee table, a bridge to whatever truth awaited. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new headlines, new judgments. But tonight, in the peaceful cocoon of her apartment with Evelyn's quiet strength beside her, Naomi found the courage to begin preparing for what lay ahead. The federal building loomed against the morning sky, all glass and steel and cold authority. Naomi's heels clicked against the polished floor as she followed a stone-faced agent through security. Her heart thundered in her chest, but she held her head high. 7:30 in the morning. The time felt important somehow, like everything about this day needed to be recorded with precision. The interview room matched her expectations. Stark white walls, a metal table, chairs that seemed designed for discomfort. A camera blinked red in the corner, recording every moment. 2 agents sat across from her, their faces professionally blank. And there, standing by the wall, was her father. Marcus Carter's presence filled the room without him saying a word. His suit was crisp, his posture military straight. He looked older than she remembered. More lines around his eyes, more grey at his temples. Their eyes met briefly before he looked away, focusing on the file in his hands. "Please state your full name for the record." One of the agents began, "Naomi Grace Carter." Her voice came out steady, surprising her. "Ms. Carter, we appreciate your voluntary cooperation in this matter. Please understand that this interview is being recorded and may be used in ongoing federal investigations." Naomi nodded. "I understand. Please walk us through the evening of Tuesday, March 15, beginning with your initial meeting with Julian Hale." Naomi took a deep breath, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. "We met at the corner cafe at 6:30 in the evening. He was already there when I arrived." She recounted everything with careful detail. Their conversation topics, the walk they took afterward, the time spent in her apartment. She described Julian's demeanor, his words, his apparent openness. Through it all, she felt her father's presence like a weight, though he never spoke. "Did Mr. Hale discuss his business dealings or mention any pending legal matters?" the second agent asked. "No, he said he was between projects as a consultant. He talked about wanting to set things right in his life, but he didn't specify what that meant." "And you didn't recognize him?" "No, he introduced himself only as Julian. We met through a dating site where people often use first names only." The questions continued, precise and probing. They asked about Julian's phone usage, whether he'd received any calls or messages. They wanted to know if he'd left the apartment at any point during the night. Naomi answered everything truthfully, watching her father's face for any reaction. There was none. After 2 hours, they took a break. Naomi's throat was dry from talking. An assistant brought her water, but no one spoke to her. Through the glass walls, she could see her father in discussion with the other agents, his gestures controlled but emphatic. When they resumed, the tone shifted slightly. "Ms. Carter, are you aware that Mr. Hale has declined to provide any additional statements beyond naming you as his alibi?" "No, I wasn't aware." "Does this surprise you?" Naomi considered carefully. "I don't know Mr. Hale well enough to say what would be surprising for him." "But you spent an intimate evening with him." "I spent an honest evening with him," Naomi corrected quietly. "Whether that was intimate depends on your definition." For the first time, she saw something flicker across her father's face. Surprise, perhaps, at her composure. The questioning continued until nearly noon. Every detail was examined, every time stamp verified. Through it all, Naomi maintained her dignity, answering truthfully but refusing to speculate beyond what she knew firsthand. Finally, the agents gathered their materials. "Thank you for your cooperation, Miss Carter. We may need to contact you again as the investigation proceeds." As the others filed out, Marcus remained. For a moment, father and daughter stood in loaded silence. "You need to understand something," he said finally, his voice low and controlled. "Proximity to cases like this, to people like Hale, it can destroy everything you've built. Your reputation, your career, your future." "Is that concern as my father or as an investigator?" Naomi asked quietly. Marcus's jaw tightened. "It's professional courtesy. You seem unaware of the gravity of your situation." "No, Dad. I'm very aware. But I won't apologize for showing kindness to someone who treated me with respect, even if it turns out that respect wasn't genuine." "Kindness?" Marcus's voice held an edge. You let a suspect in a major federal investigation into your home, into your bed, into my trust. Naomi interrupted, which is more than I can say for some people in my life. The words hung between them. Years of unspoken hurt crystallized in a moment. Marcus straightened his tie, a gesture she remembered from childhood, his signal that emotions were being locked away again. Be careful, Naomi, that's all I'm saying. He moved toward the door. You know, Naomi said softly, just once. I wish you could see me as your daughter first and a potential liability second. Marcus paused but didn't turn around. Then he was gone, leaving Naomi alone with the echo of her words. She gathered her purse with trembling hands, exhausted from maintaining composure for so long. In the lobby, she checked her phone for the first time in hours. 3 missed calls from unknown numbers, likely reporters, and 1 message from a law office. The message was brief and formal. Julian Hale's attorney requested a meeting to deliver a private communication from his client. The timing and location would be at her discretion. Naomi stood in the federal building's shadow, holding her phone like it might burn her. The morning's interrogation had left her feeling scraped raw, abandoned all over again by the father who'd never learned to bridge the gap between duty and love. And now this message, another piece in a puzzle she hadn't asked to solve. She watched people stream past on the sidewalk, going about their normal lives, while hers had become a maze of questions without answers. Whatever message Julian wanted to send, it would change things again. The question was whether she had the strength to face another shift in her rapidly tilting world. The phone felt heavy in her hand as she considered her response. After everything, the public exposure, the professional suspension, the painful reunion with her father, she still had a choice to make. Accept the message or walk away. Listen to one more truth or protect what little peace she had left. The law office lobby felt too pristine, too removed from the chaos that had become Naomi's life. She sat in a leather chair, her hands folded in her lap, watching the second hand tick on an elegant wall clock. At exactly 7 o'clock, Julian's attorney appeared. Ms. Carter, thank you for coming. Please follow me. His office matched his demeanor, organized, understated, professional. He gestured to a chair across from his desk, and Naomi noticed how he positioned himself as a neutral presence, neither too close nor too distant. Mr. Hale has prepared a written statement he asked me to share with you personally. He began, removing an envelope from a folder. He was explicit that you should read it in private, but I'm available to answer any immediate questions afterward. Naomi accepted the envelope. The paper was heavy, expensive. Julian's handwriting was neat, but showed signs of pressure. He'd written with intensity, if not urgency. Dear Naomi, the letter began. She took a deep breath and continued reading. First, I need to apologize for the disruption to your life. What I'm about to explain isn't an excuse. Its context, I hope, will help you understand. I've known for months that federal investigators were building a case against my family's company. What they don't know is that I've spent the last year gathering evidence of corruption that goes deeper than they suspect. I turned myself in now, before they could execute their planned raid, because an early morning operation would have endangered innocent employees and possibly led to violence. I named you as my alibi because I knew they were already aware of our meeting. You were under surveillance that night, not because of anything you did, but because of me. By openly acknowledging our time together, I protected you from being treated as a potential co-conspirator. It was the cleanest way to keep you safe. Yes, I knew who your father was when I reached out to you. I won't insult you by denying that. But Naomi, what happened between us was real. I chose to meet you because your profile showed someone with integrity, someone who might understand choosing truth over loyalty. But I stayed because of who you are, your kindness, your genuine faith, the way you listen without judgment. That night meant more to me than you can know. For a few hours, I wasn't a Hale, wasn't an informant, wasn't carrying the weight of what I had to do. I was just a man sharing honest conversation with a remarkable woman. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect you to finish reading this letter. But I needed you to know that while my presence in your life was calculated, my response to you was anything but. With deep respect and regret, Julian. Naomi folded the letter carefully. Her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. The attorney waited patiently, his expression professional but not unkind. He knew, she said finally. He knew everything. About my father, about the investigation. He knew exactly what he was doing. Yes, the attorney confirmed. But if I may offer an observation, Mr. Hale had many options for handling his surrender. The path he chose prioritized minimizing harm to others, including you. Was that priority or manipulation? In my experience, Ms. Carter, the truth usually lies somewhere between our best hopes and worst fears. Naomi nodded slowly. Can I ask you something? Not as his attorney, but as someone who knows him? He considered this, then gave a slight nod. The man I met, the one who asked questions and really listened, who prayed awkwardly but meant it. Was that real? Mr. Hale has been my client for 6 years, the attorney said carefully. I've never known him to pray with anyone. The words settled over Naomi like a warm blanket. She touched the letter in her lap, remembering Julian's voice, his gentle attention, the way he'd stumbled through grace before their midnight tea. Is he allowed visitors? She asked. Limited ones, yes. Would you like me to arrange something? Please. The word came out before she could second-guess it. Back in her apartment, Naomi sat in her prayer corner, letter in hand. The tears she'd held back all evening finally fell freely. Lord, she whispered, I don't understand your plan here. I'm angry and confused and hurt, but something in my spirit won't let me walk away. Help me see clearly. Help me find your truth in all of this. She cried until her tears ran dry, until the anger melted into something softer, not quite forgiveness, but understanding. Julian had made choices that affected her deeply, but he'd also chosen a path that protected others, even at great personal cost. The moon cast shadows through her window as Naomi finally rose from her prayer corner. She was tired, emotionally drained, but somehow lighter. Tomorrow she would visit Julian. Not because she owed him anything, but because her heart, guided by a wisdom beyond her own, told her it was right. She placed the letter in her Bible, between the pages of Proverbs. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. She read softly, and lean not on your own understanding. Tonight, that would have to be enough. 2 days crawled by like molasses. Each hour brought new paperwork, security clearances, and bureaucratic hurdles that tested Naomi's patience. The detention center's visitor coordinator explained everything methodically. Background checks, personal item restrictions, scheduled time slots that couldn't be rushed. We understand you're an approved witness in an ongoing federal investigation, the coordinator said over the phone, her voice professionally neutral. But protocol still requires 48 hours minimum for first-time visitor processing. Finally, on a Wednesday morning, Naomi stood in the visitor check-in area. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows on institutional beige walls. She surrendered her purse, phone, and jewelry to a security officer who logged each item with mechanical precision. "Arms out," instructed a female guard, running a metal detector wand over Naomi's simple navy dress. The only item they allowed her to keep was her small Bible. Through 3 separate security doors, each with its distinctive metallic clang, Naomi was led to a private visitation room. Unlike the plastic chairs and plexiglass dividers she'd seen in movies, this space held a simple table and 2 chairs. Her father's position in the investigation had granted her this small dignity of privacy. Julian entered, escorted by a guard. The orange jumpsuit couldn't dim the quiet dignity in his bearing, though dark circles beneath his eyes revealed sleepless nights. His hands were cuffed in front of him. "The cuffs stay on," the guard stated flatly. "You have 1 hour." He positioned himself outside the door's window. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Julian's eyes held a mix of gratitude and regret that made Naomi's heart ache. "Thank you for coming," he said softly. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't either," Naomi admitted, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "But I need to understand." Julian nodded, settling into the chair across from her. "Ask me anything. No more half-truths or strategic omissions. You deserve the whole story." Naomi opened her Bible, not to read, but to ground herself. "Start at the beginning. All of it." Taking a deep breath, Julian began. The Hale family empire was built on technological innovation, but it was maintained through corruption. My grandfather started it, buying patents that weren't for sale, burying innovations that threatened our market share, bribing officials to look the other way. My father made it an art form. His cuffed hands tightened. I grew up watching it all, trained to take my place in the machine. But something in me always rebelled against it. Maybe it was the values my mother tried to instill before she died. Maybe it was just a conscience I couldn't quite kill. "When did you decide to act?" Naomi asked. 3 years ago. A young engineer developed a breakthrough in sustainable energy, something that could have helped millions of people. My father's board arranged to buy her company, promising to develop the technology. Instead, they buried it and forced her out with an ironclad non-compete agreement. Julian's voice cracked. She took her own life 2 months later. Naomi reached across the table instinctively, then caught herself. Julian's sad smile acknowledged the aborted gesture. "That was my breaking point," he continued. "I started gathering evidence. Emails, financial records, recorded conversations. Everything I could access without raising suspicion. I created encrypted backups and fail-safes, storing them where even I couldn't be forced to retrieve them. Then I reached out to the FBI. And that's when you learned about my father?" "Yes. Agent Carter was assigned as lead investigator. His reputation for integrity made him the perfect choice. He couldn't be bought or intimidated. Learning about you..." Julian met her eyes directly. "I won't lie. Initially meeting you was strategic. I thought building a connection might help demonstrate my sincerity to the investigation." "But," Naomi prompted softly, "but God has a way of upending our careful plans." A gentle smile touched his lips. "That night with you, the conversations, the prayers, the simple peace of it, it gave me the strength to finally do what needed to be done. To choose truth over power, whatever the cost." Naomi's fingers traced the Bible's leather cover. "The evidence you gathered, is it enough?" "More than enough. The fail-safe system I created will release everything to multiple federal agencies and media outlets if anything happens to me. The Hale Empire won't survive this, and honestly, it shouldn't." "Your own family," Naomi breathed. "Family should be about love and trust, not power and control." Julian's words carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. "I've learned that too late, maybe, but I did learn it." Silence filled the room as Naomi absorbed everything. Outside the window, clouds shifted, sending patterns of sunlight dancing across the table between them. "I don't expect anything from you, Naomi," Julian said quietly. "Not forgiveness, not understanding, certainly not. Anything more. But meeting you showed me that genuine connection is possible, that faith can be real and not just a social tool. Whatever happens next, I'll always be grateful for that." Naomi opened her Bible, her voice soft but clear. "The truth shall set you free." We usually hear that as a threat or a challenge, but it's really a promise, isn't it? "Yes," Julian whispered. "It is. Would you pray with me?" He nodded, bowing his head. The handcuffs clinked softly as he folded his hands. Naomi's prayer rose from deep within her heart. "Lord, you see all things, our struggles, our choices, our attempts to find our way through darkness to light. Guide us toward your truth. Grant us courage to stand firm when that truth costs us. Help us trust that your justice is bigger than our understanding." Her words filled the sterile room with something holy, not the polished holiness of church services, but the raw, real holiness of broken people reaching for grace. When she finished, Julian's amen was rough with emotion. The guard tapped the window. Time was almost up. "I'll be testifying," Naomi said, standing. "The whole truth, as I experienced it. I wouldn't expect anything else from you." Julian's smile held respect, and something warmer that neither of them dared name. As she gathered her Bible, Naomi felt a surprising lightness in her spirit. The situation remained complicated, the path ahead uncertain, but truth had cleared the air like a summer storm. She believed, bone deep, that justice would prevail, not the cold justice of courts alone, but the deeper justice of light overcoming darkness, of truth setting captives free. The guard stepped in to escort Julian out. At the doorway, he turned back. "Thank you, Naomi, for everything." She nodded, watching him go with clear eyes and a steady heart. Whatever came next, she was ready to face it. The morning light crept through Naomi's bedroom window, but she had been awake for hours. Sleep had become a distant memory since her visit with Julian. Her phone buzzed insistently on the nightstand, another news alert. With trembling fingers, she reached for it, her heart sinking as she read the headline, "Breaking documents show Carter Hale financial connection prior to arrest." The room spun around her. Attached to the article were grainy photographs of bank statements and emails, carefully edited to suggest what wasn't there. They painted a damning picture, regular deposits into an account bearing her name, dating back 6 months before Julian's arrest. "No," she whispered, her voice breaking. "This isn't real." Her phone rang, her father's number. Naomi answered with numb fingers. "Have you seen it?" Marcus Carter's voice was tight, professional. "Dad, those documents are fake. I know." He cut her off, his tone clipped. "But they're convincing enough that we have to respond officially. The integrity of the investigation is at stake." Naomi pressed her free hand against her forehead. "What does that mean?" A heavy pause. "I've signed a recommendation for your temporary detention pending review. Officers will be there within the hour." The words hit like physical blows. "You're arresting me? Your own daughter?" "This isn't personal, Naomi. It's procedure." She laughed bitterly. "When has anything ever been personal with you?" 2 sharp knocks at her door made her jump. Through the peephole, she saw 2 uniformed officers, faces professionally blank. "They're here," she said into the phone. "Cooperate fully. Tell the truth. It will sort itself out." Marcus paused. "I'm sorry." The line went dead before she could respond. The next hours passed in a blur of harsh fluorescent lights and cold metal surfaces. They took her fingerprints, all 10 digits pressed carefully into black ink, then rolled onto crisp white cards. Her photograph, front and side views, holding a number. Her personal belongings sealed in a clear plastic bag. The detective interviewing her was younger than she expected, with kind eyes that couldn't quite meet hers. "These allegations are serious, Ms. Carter," he said, spreading the leaked documents across the metal table. "Can you explain these transactions?" "They're fabricated," Naomi replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I've never had access to those accounts. I've never received money from the Hales." "We'll need to verify your financial records. You have my permission. Check everything." The questions continued for hours. Where had she met Julian? What did they discuss that night? Had there been previous contact? Phone calls? Emails? Each answer seemed to spawn 3 more questions. Finally, the detective closed his folder. "Based on your cooperation and lack of flight risk, you're being released on your own recognizance. You'll need to remain in the city and be available for further questioning." "What about Julian?" Naomi asked. "Can I see him?" "Mr. Hale has been moved to isolation for his protection. No visitors allowed at this time." Outside the police station, reporters swarmed like hungry insects, their cameras flashing in the afternoon sun. Naomi pushed through their shouted questions, keeping her head high despite the shame burning in her chest. "Ms. Carter, did you help Julian Hale embezzle millions? Were you part of the conspiracy from the beginning? How long have you been working with the Hales?" She made it to her car, hands shaking so badly she could barely insert the key. The drive home was a fog of tears she refused to let fall. Her apartment felt different when she returned, violated by the morning's police search, stripped of its sanctuary status. Evidence tape still sealed several drawers. Her laptop was gone, along with her phone and personal papers. Naomi sank onto her couch, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of the day. The betrayal cut deep on multiple levels, not just the false documents that threatened her freedom, but her father's clinical detachment as he signed away her dignity. And Julian, was he safe? Did he know what was happening? The isolation order felt calculated, cutting off their connection when they needed it most. The sun set outside her window, painting the walls in shades of orange and purple. Naomi sat motionless in the growing darkness, her Bible unopened beside her. For the first time since this ordeal began, words of prayer wouldn't come. The silence in her apartment pressed against her ears like a physical presence, heavy with loss and uncertainty. Her father's words echoed mockingly, "It will sort itself out." But what would be left of her when it did? Her reputation was in tatters, her job likely gone, her faith tested beyond anything she'd imagined. Even if the truth eventually emerged, the stain of suspicion would linger. A police car cruised slowly past her window, probably making sure she was complying with the terms of her release. The headlights swept across her wall like searching fingers before fading away, leaving her alone in the darkness. Naomi hugged herself tightly, feeling small and lost in the empty room. The strength that had carried her through Julian's arrest, through the media circus, through her father's emotional distance, it finally crumbled. Silent tears tracked down her cheeks as the night deepened around her. Love had brought her here. Love for a man who'd chosen truth over family, love for a father who couldn't choose her over duty. Both loves had betrayed her, leaving her alone with her integrity as cold comfort in the gathering dark. Dawn crept through Naomi's apartment windows, finding her still on the couch where she'd spent the night. Her neck ached from the awkward position, and her eyes felt swollen from crying. The morning light revealed the disarray left by yesterday's police search. Papers scattered, drawers left open, the ordinary peace of her home disrupted. She forced herself to move, washing her face with cold water that didn't quite wake her from this nightmare. Her reflection in the bathroom mirror showed dark circles under her eyes and tension in her jaw that hadn't been there a week ago. How had everything changed so quickly? Naomi pulled her largest suitcase from the hall closet, its wheels squeaking against the hardwood floor. She began methodically filling it with clothes, trying not to think too deeply about what she was doing. A week's worth of outfits, then 2, her toiletries bag, important documents that hadn't been seized, her grandmother's Bible. Her hands trembled as she folded each item, placing them carefully in the suitcase. The methodical task helped quiet her racing thoughts, gave her something concrete to focus on besides the crushing weight of recent events. She deliberately avoided turning on the television or checking any news websites on her backup phone. The thought of seeing her name in headlines again made her stomach clench. The morning sun climbed higher, warming the apartment. Naomi paused in her packing to brew a cup of coffee, but the familiar aroma brought no comfort. Instead, it reminded her of that first meeting with Julian at the cafe. His gentle smile, the way he'd listened so intently. Had any of it been real? The question haunted her still. A soft knock at the door made her jump, spilling coffee on the counter. She knew that particular pattern of knocks. Aunt Evelyn. For a moment, Naomi considered pretending she wasn't home, but she couldn't bring herself to shut out the one person who had stood firmly beside her through all of this. "Come in," she called out, her voice rougher than she expected. Evelyn entered, taking in the scene, the open suitcase, the scattered belongings, the defeat in her niece's posture, with understanding in her warm brown eyes. She set down her purse and wrapped Naomi in a tight hug without saying a word. "I can't stay here," Naomi whispered into her aunt's shoulder, finally voicing the decision she'd been wrestling with all morning. "Everyone knows where I live. The reporters won't leave me alone. And Dad—" Her voice caught on the word. Evelyn guided her to the couch, keeping one arm around her shoulders. "Running won't solve anything, sweetheart. It might give me peace." Naomi gestured helplessly at the window, where camera flashes occasionally lit up from the street below. "I could start fresh somewhere else, where nobody knows about any of this. And leave behind everything you've built here, your ministry work, the youth group kids who look up to you." Evelyn's voice was gentle but firm. "That's not the Naomi Carter I know. Maybe I don't know who Naomi Carter is anymore." The words came out bitter and lost. Everything I thought I knew about myself, about trust, about love, about faith, it's all been turned upside down. Evelyn was quiet for a moment, her hand rubbing soothing circles on Naomi's back. "Tell me something. Has anything about who you are fundamentally changed? Your integrity, your compassion, your faith in God's plan?" Naomi considered this carefully. "No," she admitted finally, "but it feels like none of those things matter anymore. The world has already decided who I am based on these lies." "Then that's exactly why you need to stay." Evelyn's voice grew stronger. "Your truth matters more than their lies. Your character matters more than their accusations. But if you run now, you let them win. You let them define who you are." Tears welled in Naomi's eyes again, but these felt different from the hopeless ones she'd shed the night before. "I'm so tired, Aunt Evelyn. I don't know if I have the strength to keep fighting." "Then we'll pray for strength," Evelyn said simply. She reached for Naomi's hands, and together they bowed their heads. Naomi's prayer came haltingly at first, then with growing conviction. She didn't ask for rescue or vindication. Instead, she prayed for endurance, for clarity, for the courage to face whatever came next. She prayed for Julian's safety in isolation, for her father's heart to soften, for truth to prevail in its own time. Most of all, she prayed for the strength to remain faithful to who she was, even when the world tried to make her someone else. When they finished praying, Naomi felt steadier. Not confident exactly, but more grounded. She got up to make fresh coffee for both of them, and Evelyn began quietly returning items from the suitcase to their proper places. The afternoon sun was streaming through the windows when Naomi's phone rang. She almost didn't answer the unfamiliar number, but something made her press accept. "Ms. Carter?" The voice was crisp and professional. "This is Clara Martinez from the federal clerk's office. I'm calling to request that you remain available in the city for the next 72 hours. There may be developments in the case that require your presence." Naomi's heart began to race. "What kind of developments?" "I'm not at liberty to discuss details, but it's important that you can be reached at this number and address. Can you confirm you'll be available?" "Yes," Naomi said, surprising herself with how firm her voice sounded. "I'll be here." After hanging up, she stood for a long moment, looking at the half-empty suitcase still open on her bed. Then, with deliberate movements, she began removing the remaining clothes. Each item she put away felt like a small act of faith, a choice to stand firm rather than flee. Evelyn watched from the doorway, a proud smile touching her lips. "Welcome back, sweetheart." "I'm still scared," Naomi admitted, folding a sweater with trembling hands. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you choose to stay anyway." Together they finished unpacking the suitcase. Naomi tucked it back into the hall closet, closing the door firmly on the temptation to run. Whatever came next, she would face it here, grounded in who she was and what she believed. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was a choice. And sometimes that was enough to begin finding the way forward. The morning sunlight filtered through Naomi's apartment windows as she tried to focus on reading her Bible. The words blurred before her eyes as anxiety gnawed at her stomach. 2 days had passed since the clerk's call, and every hour felt like an eternity of waiting. Her phone sat silent on the coffee table. She'd checked it 17 times in the last hour alone. The devotional she'd attempted to read lay open to Psalm 27. "Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord." Waiting. It seemed that's all she'd done lately. Across town, in the stark, fluorescent light of the federal building, Marcus Carter sat at his desk reviewing case files. His coffee had long since gone cold, forgotten amid the stack of documents demanding his attention. A gentle knock on his door made him look up. "Agent Carter?" The clerk held a sealed envelope. "This just arrived from Judge Reynolds's chambers. It's marked urgent." Marcus took the envelope, noting the official seal. As the clerk left, he carefully opened it, pulling out a USB drive and accompanying documentation. His eyes widened as he read the first page. The timestamp on Julian Hale's recorded confession was from 6 months ago. Marcus plugged the drive into his computer and put on his headphones. Julian's face filled the screen, calm and composed despite the gravity of what he was about to share. "I, Julian Hale, am making this recording of my own free will," Julian began. "What follows is a complete confession of corporate corruption within Hale Technologies, including evidence of illegal activities by members of the board and external conspirators." For the next 2 hours, Marcus sat transfixed as Julian methodically laid out a trail of evidence: doctored financial records, offshore accounts, bribes paid to silence whistleblowers. Each accusation was backed by meticulous documentation. But it was the final segment that made Marcus's hands tremble. "I specifically wish to address any allegations against Naomi Carter," Julian stated, his voice growing softer but more intense. "She had no prior knowledge of any illegal activities. Our meeting was intentional on my part, but not for the reasons investigators might assume. I chose to spend my last night of freedom with her because I had observed her character from afar. Her integrity, her faith, her kindness to others. These qualities represented everything I wished I had been brave enough to stand for sooner." Marcus paused the video, running a hand over his face. He thought of how quickly he'd signed the recommendation for Naomi's arrest, How easily he'd believed she might be complicit. The video continued. I am providing this evidence now, knowing it will likely prevent me from receiving leniency in sentencing, but protecting an innocent woman's reputation and future is worth that cost. Naomi Carter's only crime was showing kindness to a stranger who didn't deserve it. When the recording ended, Marcus sat in silence, the weight of truth pressing down on him. He'd been so focused on justice that he'd forgotten mercy, so determined to uncover corruption that he'd been willing to sacrifice his own daughter's reputation. Across town, Naomi had given up on reading. She paced her apartment, pausing occasionally to straighten items that didn't need straightening. The afternoon light was beginning to fade when her phone finally rang. Ms. Carter? It was Clara Martinez from the clerk's office again. Please remain at your current location. Someone will be coming to speak with you shortly about recent developments in the case. Naomi's heart raced. Can you tell me anything about these developments? I'm sorry, I'm not at liberty to discuss details. Someone will be there within the hour. After hanging up, Naomi sank onto her couch, clasping her hands together to stop them from shaking. She closed her eyes and prayed, not for any specific outcome, but for strength to face whatever was coming. Meanwhile, Marcus gathered the evidence files with trembling hands. He'd already sent copies to the appropriate authorities, but these he needed to show Naomi himself. He owed her that much. The drive to her apartment felt surreal. How many times had he passed this route over the years, never stopping? How many birthdays, holidays, and ordinary days had he let slip by, telling himself he was too busy serving justice to be a father? The setting sun cast long shadows across the city as Marcus parked outside Naomi's building. He sat for a moment, staring at the steering wheel, the sealed envelope heavy in his jacket pocket. Then, with a deep breath, he stepped out of the car. The walk to her door felt longer than any interrogation room. Each step carried the weight of years of absence, of choosing duty over daughter, of assumptions made and trust broken. He paused outside her apartment, hand raised to knock. Inside, Naomi heard footsteps in the hallway and rose from the couch. She smoothed her shirt with nervous hands, took a deep breath, and waited for the knock that would bring whatever news was coming. Marcus stood there, his knuckles inches from the door, feeling the full impact of this moment. He wasn't here as Agent Carter now. He was here as a father who had failed his daughter, a father who needed to make things right. The hallway was quiet except for the hum of the building's air conditioning. Time seemed suspended between one breath and the next, between years of separation and the possibility of reconciliation, between a knock that hadn't yet sounded and a door that hadn't yet opened. The knock finally came, 3 hesitant taps that seemed to echo in Naomi's chest. She opened the door to find her father standing there, looking more uncertain than she'd ever seen him. Gone was the stern federal agent from the interrogation room. In his place stood a man who suddenly seemed older, more vulnerable. "May I come in?" Marcus asked softly. Naomi nodded, stepping back to let him enter. The apartment felt smaller with him in it, the space between them charged with years of unspoken words. "I received some evidence today," Marcus began, his voice rough. He pulled an envelope from his jacket. "But before I show you this, I need to say something." Naomi sat on the edge of her couch, hands folded tightly in her lap. Marcus remained standing, as if unable to fully relax in this space that should have been familiar, but wasn't. "I've spent my entire career pursuing justice," he continued. "I believed that was the highest calling, to expose corruption, to hold people accountable. But today I realized how badly I failed at the most important responsibility I had." His voice cracked slightly. "Being your father." Naomi felt tears burning behind her eyes, but stayed silent, letting him speak. "When your mother died, I threw myself into work because it was easier than facing the grief. I told myself I was providing for you by building my career, But the truth is, I was hiding. And then, when this case came up," he shook his head, "I let my pursuit of justice blind me to what should have been obvious. Your character, your integrity. I'm so sorry, Naomi." The tears spilled over now, running down Naomi's cheeks. "You signed the arrest recommendation?" She whispered. "I did." Marcus's shoulders slumped. "I convinced myself I was being impartial, that I couldn't show favoritism just because you're my daughter. But that's not what a father should do. A father should protect his child, should know his child well enough to trust her character." He finally sat down in the armchair across from her. Julian Hale recorded a complete confession months ago. He detailed everything, all the corporate corruption, all the evidence. But more importantly, he made it clear that you were completely innocent. He chose to meet you that night because he'd learned about your reputation for integrity through researching me. He wanted his last night of freedom to be spent with someone who represented everything he wished he'd had the courage to be. Naomi absorbed this, her hands unconsciously relaxing in her lap. "So it wasn't all manipulation?" "No." Marcus shook his head. "He sacrificed any chance of leniency to protect you. The evidence he provided ensures his own guilty plea, but completely clears your name." A long silence stretched between them. Outside, the city sounds filtered in. Traffic, distant sirens, life going on as normal while their world shifted on its axis. "I don't know how to be a good father," Marcus admitted quietly. "I'm better at investigating criminals than building relationships. But I want to learn. If you're willing to give me that chance, I'd like to try to make up for lost time." Naomi looked at her father, really looked at him. She saw the grief he'd never properly processed, the loneliness that mirrored her own, the regret etched in the lines around his eyes. Her heart, which had been so guarded, softened. "I forgive you," she said softly. "Not because what you did was okay, but because holding on to hurt only hurts me more. And because," she took a deep breath, "because I want my father back too." Marcus's eyes filled with tears, something Naomi hadn't seen since her mother's funeral. He reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. They sat like that for a long while, neither speaking, letting the years of distance begin to heal in the quiet understanding between them. The sun had fully set when Marcus's phone buzzed. He checked it and smiled. The first real smile Naomi had seen from him in years. "The official statement just went out," he said. "All charges against you have been dropped. The media's already picking up the story." Naomi felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "What happens now?" "There's a press briefing scheduled for 8 o'clock tonight. I'm supposed to give a statement about the case." He squeezed her hand. "Would you come with me?" "To the briefing?" "Yes, I think it's time people heard the truth from both of us." An hour later, they stood together at the federal building. Camera lights blazed as Marcus stepped up to the podium, Naomi slightly behind him. The room fell silent. "Good evening," Marcus began, his voice strong and clear. "Today, new evidence was presented in the Hale Corporation investigation that conclusively proves the innocence of Naomi Carter. As the lead investigator on this case, I want to publicly acknowledge that Ms. Carter has demonstrated remarkable integrity throughout this ordeal." He paused, then continued with more emotion than anyone had ever heard from the usually stoic agent. "And as her father, I want to express my profound admiration for the strength of character she has shown. When faced with public scrutiny and false accusations, she responded with dignity and grace. She is everything I could hope for in a daughter, and I am deeply proud of her." Cameras flashed as Marcus stepped back, putting his arm around Naomi's shoulders. She leaned into him slightly, feeling the protective warmth she'd missed for so many years. The media would craft their own narrative about this moment, about the federal agent and his daughter, about redemption and reconciliation. But for Naomi and Marcus, the real story was in the silent understanding that passed between them. The road ahead would require patience, forgiveness, and the courage to be vulnerable. But for the first time in years, they would walk it together. The noise of the press conference faded to background as father and daughter stood united, their shadows merging into one in the bright camera lights. Sometimes, Naomi realized, the most powerful testimony isn't about guilt or innocence at all. Sometimes it's about the quiet miracle of hearts healing, of truth bringing not just justice, but restoration. The first Monday of October dawned crisp and clear as Naomi made her way up the courthouse steps. 3 weeks had passed since her father's public statement, and today marked the beginning of Julian's testimony. Her modest navy dress and simple, pearl earrings reflected her determination to face these proceedings with dignity. Inside the marble halls, her footsteps echoed alongside others gathering for the day's hearing. The security guard, now familiar with her daily presence, gave a respectful nod as she passed through the metal detector. She'd been here every day, watching silently from the gallery as the case unfolded. The courtroom filled slowly. Naomi took her usual seat in the third row, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. Her father, Marcus, slipped in beside her, a new routine they'd established. He didn't speak, but his presence steadied her. At precisely 9 o'clock in the morning, Julian was led in. Despite the prison jumpsuit, he carried himself with quiet dignity. His eyes met Naomi's briefly, conveying volumes in that fleeting connection. Then he faced forward, ready to begin. "Please state your name for the record." The judge instructed. "Julian Alexander Hale." His voice was clear, unwavering. For the next 4 hours, Julian methodically detailed the corruption that had plagued the Hale Corporation for decades. He spoke of offshore accounts, manipulated contracts, and systematic bribery. Each revelation landed like stones in still water, rippling through the gathered crowd. The decision to cooperate wasn't made lightly, Julian testified. But watching honest people suffer while we prospered through deception became unbearable. Sometimes doing the right thing means sacrificing everything you thought you wanted. The Hale family executives sat stone-faced as their empire crumbled. Their expensive suits and rigid postures couldn't mask their growing desperation as Julian's testimony continued day after day. By the second week, the media coverage had shifted dramatically. Headlines that once screamed about scandal now spoke of courage and redemption. Naomi watched as reporters who had hounded her weeks ago now praised Julian's moral stand. During a brief recess, Julian's attorney approached Naomi in the hallway. "He's asking about you," he said quietly. "Wants to make sure you're holding up okay." Naomi nodded, fighting back tears. "Tell him I'm proud of him," she whispered. The third week brought Naomi's own testimony. She stood before the court, hands clasped tightly together, and spoke her truth without embellishment or anger. "I met Julian Hale on September 15th. She began. "He was kind, respectful, and genuine. What happened between us was real, but it was also brief. I didn't know his identity or his situation. What I do know is that he chose to protect me at great personal cost." The prosecution pressed her about prior knowledge, trying to find holes in her story. But truth has its own power, and Naomi's quiet dignity never wavered. "No," she stated firmly. "I had no knowledge of the Hale Corporation's activities. Julian never discussed business with me. Our connection was personal, not professional." Her father, watching from his seat, felt pride swell in his chest. This was his daughter, strong, honest, and full of grace. The final day of proceedings arrived on a Thursday morning. The courtroom was packed as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict. Julian stood at attention, his attorney beside him. "Julian Alexander Hale," the judge began, "this court recognizes your voluntary cooperation and the extensive evidence you've provided. However, your willing participation in years of corporate corruption cannot be ignored. Taking into account both factors, I hereby sentence you to 8 years in federal prison." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. It was a longer sentence than many had expected, the price of full confession rather than a negotiated plea. But Julian's face showed no regret. The judge continued, "Your testimony has been instrumental in bringing to light one of the largest corporate fraud cases in our state's history. The court acknowledges your moral courage in coming forward." As the bailiff led Julian away, he turned slightly, catching Naomi's eye one last time. In that glance was everything they couldn't say: gratitude, respect, and a bittersweet understanding that sometimes love means letting go. The courtroom emptied slowly. Reporters hurried out to file their stories. The Hale executives were led away to face their own charges. Legal teams packed their briefcases and dispersed. Naomi remained seated as the room cleared, her father waiting patiently beside her. The empty wooden benches gleamed in the afternoon sunlight streaming through high windows. In the silence, she felt the weight of endings and beginnings. Justice had been served, but not without cost. An empire had fallen. A man had chosen truth over freedom. And somewhere in the midst of it all, Naomi had found her own kind of strength. Not in grand gestures or dramatic stands, but in the quiet persistence of living with integrity. The last footsteps faded from the courtroom. Only then did Naomi rise, smoothing her dress one final time. She walked out with her head high, leaving behind the echoes of testimony and judgment, carrying with her the understanding that sometimes the greatest victories are won in moments of surrender. 30 days after the verdict, Naomi stood in the prison's visitor check-in area. Her hands trembled slightly as she signed the logbook, the date stark against the white paper. October 27th. The guard behind the desk checked her identification and visitor pass with methodical patience. "Down the hall to your right, Miss Carter," he said, gesturing toward a heavy metal door. "Someone will escort you to the visitation room." The hallway stretched long and sterile, fluorescent lights humming overhead. Her sensible heels clicked against the polished floor, each step echoing off concrete walls. Another guard, a woman with kind eyes, led her through 3 separate security checkpoints before they reached their destination. The visitation room was smaller than Naomi expected. Unlike the harsh institutional lighting of the hallway, soft, natural light filtered through narrow windows set high in the walls. 5 small tables were arranged neatly, bolted to the floor, each with 2 chairs facing each other. Only 2 other visitors occupied the room, speaking in hushed tones to their loved ones. "He'll be here in a moment," the guard said, directing Naomi to an empty table in the corner. Naomi smoothed her navy dress and sat down, placing her hands flat on the cool metal surface to steady herself. She had rehearsed what she wanted to say during the hour-long drive to the facility, but now the words seemed to evaporate. The door on the opposite side opened, and Julian entered. He wore standard prison attire, a khaki jumpsuit that somehow failed to diminish his natural dignity. His face looked thinner, but his eyes were clear and steady. When he saw Naomi, a gentle smile crossed his features. "You came," he said simply, taking the seat across from her. "Of course I did," Naomi replied, her voice soft but firm. "I wanted to see you before the transfer." Julian nodded, his hands clasped loosely on the table. 3 days, he said. "They're moving me to the federal facility in Thompson. It's quite a bit further away." The unspoken meaning hung between them. Future visits would be nearly impossible. This was goodbye. "How are you really doing?" Naomi asked, studying his face with concern. Julian considered the question carefully before answering. "Better than I expected, honestly. There's a strange kind of freedom in no longer having to hide. The other inmates mostly leave me alone. I think they're not quite sure what to make of the billionaire who turned himself in." A small laugh escaped Naomi's lips, and Julian's smile widened briefly before growing serious again. "Naomi, I need you to know something," he began, leaning forward slightly. "These past few months, watching you stand firm in your faith and integrity despite everything, it's reminded me of who I always wanted to be, who I still want to be." Tears pricked at the corners of Naomi's eyes, but she blinked them back. "You found that person on your own, Julian. You chose truth when it would have been easier to keep running." "Maybe," he acknowledged. "But seeing someone live out their faith so authentically, it gave me courage. You never wavered, even when it cost you everything." "Not everything," Naomi corrected gently. "I still have my integrity, my faith, and somehow, through all of this, I got my father back." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Outside, clouds shifted across the sun, causing shadows to dance across the table between them. "I've been thinking about the future," Julian said finally. 8 years is a long time. I don't want you waiting, hoping for something that might never be possible." Naomi reached across the table, stopping just short of touching his hands. Physical contact wasn't allowed. "I know," she said softly. "We both need to walk our own paths now. But Julian, your sacrifice mattered. It changed things, not just for the people your family's company hurt, but for everyone who sees that it's never too late to choose what's right." Julian's eyes grew bright with unshed tears. Would you pray with me? One last time?" "Yes," Naomi whispered. They bowed their heads, and Naomi's voice filled the space between them, steady and sure. "Dear Lord, we come before you with grateful hearts, even in this difficult moment. Thank you for your guidance through the darkness, for showing us that truth and love are worth any price. Please watch over Julian as he continues this journey. Give him strength, peace, and the knowledge that his choice to stand for truth has rippled out in ways we may never fully know. Help us both to move forward in faith, trusting that you can bring beauty from ashes and hope from hardship. Amen." "Amen," Julian echoed, his voice rough with emotion. A guard appeared quietly at Julian's shoulder. "Time's up, Mr. Hale." Julian stood slowly, drinking in one last look at Naomi's face. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything." Naomi rose as well, fighting to keep her voice steady. "God bless you, Julian." She watched as he was led away, his shoulders straight and head held high. When the door closed behind him, she remained standing for a long moment, letting the finality of the goodbye wash over her. The same kind-eyed guard appeared to escort her out. As they walked back through the series of checkpoints, Naomi felt an unexpected lightness in her heart. The path ahead was uncertain, but she was at peace with where it had led her. Stepping out into the autumn afternoon, Naomi breathed deeply of the crisp air. Leaves skittered across the parking lot in swirls of red and gold. She walked to her car alone, but not lonely. Carried by the quiet certainty that sometimes the bravest kind of love is knowing when to let go. 6 months passed like leaves turning from spring to fall. The morning sun streamed through Naomi's apartment windows as she sorted through her mail. Her fingers paused on a cream-colored envelope bearing the Thompson Federal Correctional Facility's return address. Inside, Julian's neat handwriting filled 2 pages. "Dear Naomi, something remarkable has happened in here. The silence I once feared has become a gift. In the quiet moments between dawn and breakfast, I've found a peace I never knew existed. The prison chaplain and I meet weekly for Bible study. I'm learning that true freedom isn't about where you are, but who you're becoming. Naomi settled into her favorite chair, sunlight warming her shoulders as she read. A smile spread across her face at Julian's descriptions of leading a small prayer group and tutoring fellow inmates working towards their GED certificates. Her phone buzzed, a text from her father. "Still on for church this morning?" "On my way," she replied, carefully folding Julian's letter. At church, Naomi slid into the pew beside Marcus and Aunt Evelyn. The familiar weight of her father's arm around her shoulders felt right, healing. Together they stood as the worship music began, their voices joining the congregation. Looking around at the faces she'd known for years, some who had judged, others who had supported, Naomi felt no fear, no shame. She was whole. She was home. And she understood now that love, when built on truth and faith, never truly ended. It just changed shape, like light through a prism, revealing new and unexpected beauty. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.